So, good evening, and it is festivities time in many parts of this country, in many cultures. So, happy festivals to all those who are celebrating them. And welcome to Anantha, a festival of poetry that is being put together by SamyuktaPoetry. And we began exactly a year ago, and SamyuktaPoetry was born at midnight when we set out with just a laptop and a couple of friends. But today, we still function with that laptop, but we have a lot more friends. It's been a wonderful year, a year which saw us getting a lot of affection, a lot of goodwill, and a lot of love. And it is that affection, love, and goodwill that helped us gain the confidence to have the audacity to organize a festival like Anantha. And so all those who accepted our invitation, thank you very much. And Anantha is a festival that takes its name from the city of its origin, Anantapuri, which is one of the many names of Tirunanthapuram or Trivandrum. And Anantha, more importantly, is also a nod to the eternal continuum that art is. The art that sometimes in its beauty, in its ingenuity, in its innocence, madness, defies chronology and time. And as I say this, I'm very aware of the fact that the times that we are going through are exceedingly tough and very testing. The ways that lives, livelihoods, communities are changing, the way that words and their significance is changing, the way that the meanings of words are changing, the way that the meaning of the word meeting itself is changing. And these flows of time and our role in all of this is very, very significant. And it is something that merits the instinct of sight. Let me say that again, the instinct of sight. It's a recognition of how we got where we are now. And art may not have all the answers, but it certainly has the map. In the various journeys that I have taken through poetry's engagement with time, I have been enthralled with Priya Sarukkai Chabria's interpretation of time. The way that she writes the history of time tells me that she is either a very good mathematician or a very good musician or both, but she's tried very hard to convince me that she is none of those. But I don't know whether I ought to believe her, particularly when she writes, with this measured wildness, lines like these, if I may. Why do you call? What do you want? Questions poke smoky heads through a wall of memory walled up. What now to make of nymphs and musicians and us, tangled in myth and fall? Desire is always innocent. No reason holds, no past, nor judgment. Over the years, she has created a narrative that is an anthem to the bios that we inhabit. That is an anthem to the bios that we are. I am Sonia Nair, editor of SamyuktaPoetry, and today, I, on behalf of all of you, we are going to be in conversation with Priya Sarukkai Chabria about the person, the personae, Priya, and poetry, and not necessarily in that order. So over to you, Priya. Now, as I told you, I have read almost, I think, all of your works, and I have always wanted to ask you this question. What is poetry to you? And also, tell us something about your poetic journey. How the evolution.
Right. First of all, I must thank you for that very generous introduction. Fulsome, and it's always wonderful when people tell you, things about your work, because you rarely know it fully. You begin to look into your work only when people ask you those searing questions, as you have been sending me a questionnaire about things you'd like to talk about, which makes one delve into why you did what, basically, you know, and it links up things. And I'm also very grateful and thankful to SamyuktaPoetry and, of course, your Poetry Festival and your team for this hard work. And I'm looking forward to attending many of the sessions here. But first to the large question, what does poetry mean to me? You know, I think poetry is, it's prayer, it's invocation, it is enchantment with the word, it's intuition, it is a curious moment of when you're both going deeper into yourself and simultaneously outside. You know, it is a kind of and this is one of the parts, the movements of art that I like very much, how you go in, you're searching within, as well as trying to find out what is happening around, and trying to find the language, chiseling the language, working with it, burnishing it, to get to where you are, because you're thinking very much what you say, as much as you are hopefully truthfully saying what you are thinking about. Now, being a self-taught poet, in the sense that I didn't do literature, I know more about cinema history than I do about history of the West, particularly literary history of the West. And so being a self-taught poet, what happens is that this evolution hasn't always been easy or successful. Sometimes you reinvent the wheel, you know, because you just haven't read enough, or you don't know it was done somewhere in the 15th century and there's another tradition which happens. But on the other hand, it unboxes you. You're free. And I think one of the reasons we go to art, one of the enchantments of art is exactly this: to go out of ourselves, to search for something larger, more vast in ideas, more intense in emotions, more beautiful, and for us to become other people and other things.
So, would
yeah.
you say that, actually, Priya, when you were speaking, I realized that you're making a terrible, case against structured education. Because
No,
I mean, I guess,
not at all.
structured education makes you think in a very, as you said, boxed term. But and here you are,
No,
I have seen that in your most of your lines. There is this wonderful, let's say, experiment that you do with form. Yeah, and
thank you.
personally, as a reader, what I have found is that there are these gaps that you leave in your poetry, between the lines, the kind of ways in which you slant your lines, even the choice of ellipses or commas, they're not commas exactly, there's some other punctuation mark, which, like you've used this word called acid spill. And the way those, those punctuation marks go slanting, typical acid spill kind of a thing. So you're making, I think we should just stop teaching anything or learning anything and just go by a
Not
certain
at all.
sixth sense.
Not at all. I think that, I think if I had actually studied literature, it would have made a huge difference. I might have written more because I wouldn't have spent all that time trying to find out, oh, can a journey be this too? You know, the most simple, basic facts. Each time you make a connection, you say, I've discovered it. And then you find it's been done earlier. I think study is wonderful. And why did I come to poetry in the first place? I came there because of my teachers, my English teachers, who opened literature to me and asked us to write in school. And then later in college, there was Adil Jasawala, who was teaching us for a short time. And it expanded one's universe, as it were. And let me put it this way, my journey through poetry, I think maybe others have also had this feeling that when you begin to write, it's like you're at the edge of a pond and you're looking into the pond. And all you see is your reflection and you're trying to write that down. But then after a while, I mean, it is very boring to just keep staring at yourself, isn't it? So after a certain point of time, you begin to see what is around in the pond, which gets reflected. Say a bus passing by, the shadow of a tree, a plane. And then you begin to think of the lives of the people in the bus. What is happening outside? I think that is the second step. It's still the surface of the pool that you're looking at, but you're seeing this maze of forms, this maze of other people, other experiences that are floating on the top. And then for me, my journey is to go in, dive into the water, as it were, see, look behind, underneath. And there, what do you find? You might find at the bottom of a pool an old abandoned shoe. You might find a box. You wonder what those treasures are, but what are you doing? You're trying to go beyond, at least I am trying to go beyond the apparent reality to see if there is something more. You know, this constant tussle, as it were, between Kshara and Akshara, the perishable and the imperishable, to try to find that. And finally, it is almost like, you know, you understand that there's a sense of the sacred, as it were, in everything, at least which permeates all of life. There is an interconnectedness. And this comes to me through art, through, as it were, burrowing into the waters, deep into the waters, into the silt, into the sludge of life, which is below what is apparent. Hmm? Yeah, you're mute.
Many people wish I were. I have unmuted. So, I have often, I was just, when you were speaking, I just went through my, poetry collection of yours that I have next to me here. And incidentally, since you're mentioning the lake, I found this beautiful one in Calling Over Water on page 27. Would you like to, do you have the book at hand?
Page 27.
Yes.
Yes, a part of the series called The Hauntings. This was after my mother passed away. And, you know, there are so many ways to grieve. There are levels of grief. Sometimes you're isolated. Sometimes it's almost a mystical feeling of being lost and floating in a creation, but you are connected. And this is, I think, growing from that sense of loss and mystery. So this is the first, the haunting, the lake. You cannot drown in the lake. It yawns and lulls against tegment and pulse. Your womb cradles its contours. Sun-dapples chase the lake's face. Shooting stars plunge into its depth. A cobalt wind blows from end to end, dropping eyes of fire in its wake. Moonlight shivers on its swell of peacock feathers. Dive in and you float, embryo in a sack. Your mouth quivers with syllables of song. A serpent sleeps like a bow in your hand. The lake murmurs in your ear. A pale, wrinkled stem still connects you with your mother. That was one of those. That was one of, I always, after my mother passed, I'm always in every meeting I do reading poems for her. And I'm glad you asked me to do this, you know. May I, I had sent you an image of an Abhisarika Naika,
Yeah,
a painting. I'd just like to speak about that, if I may.
sure. Coming up, please tell me if you can see the screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Can we have that screen bigger, the image bigger?
No, this is as big as it goes. Yeah, is that okay now?
Okay, then, okay, then I wonder if you can see this. It's a painting of a woman who's walking through the rain, and she's an Abhisarika Naika. This was painted around in the 17th century, Basoli style. We don't really know who the artist was, and this is a woman who, in the 16th century, there's this person, this great scholar, aesthetist called Keshwadasa, and he categorizes women in love into these Ashtanaikas, the 8 types of Naikas. And the Abhisarika Naika is one of them. The most famous kind of Abhisarika Naika you can think of is possibly Radha going to meet Krishna. But this is a secular version. She is a young woman walking in the dark, going out to meet her beloved. And for me, this Abhisarika Naika always symbolizes, rather romantically, I must say, the spirit of poetry, the spirit of the artist, because you're walking in the dark, you're walking through your fears, you don't know where you are going, and I mean, what are the dangers you face, but still, it is a call that is pulling you on. So this figure is a figure for me. She's a muse, a figure of creativity who has been walking through my mind for decades, you know. So I would like to keep returning to her whenever possible because she is a hallmark for me. When you walk, taking the risk, because poetry writing, all literature, all art is taking a hell of a lot of risks to go where you want, even if you don't know where that quite is, the questing, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, those journeys through time that you were mentioning, and the role of art,
Yeah.
the way that you have brought them together. I suppose, it is these journeys through time that you were mentioning that forms a major concern in your poetic narrative. Because, even in the book, the collection called Fafner's Heart, which is a world poetry in translation edition.
Yeah.
There are these, mergings and the concerns with art from antiquity and poetry from antiquity. So,
Yes. I mean, why do we, I think the gift of art, of all art, which comes to us, it's like a tapestry that you draw on. And I like to work with earlier forms because it challenges you on many levels. On the one hand, I love the geographies of imagination, which you won't have otherwise known about, the way they connect with nature, the way they connect with each other. Um, then you have an understanding of history through the voices of the speakers. Most of them are men, some of them are women. You have men writing as women very often, but there is this entire rich conversation on art and on nature, on living that has gone by. Now, also what draws me there is that the intensity of the emotion kind of carries on over the ages. It's not as if, I don't think you, the birds,
Thank you,
how
birds. Yes.
I don't think you can make it a one-to-one, take them from there and put them right out here. But the intensity of emotion is what I think you can plug into, because what are we talking about when we speak about poetry? We are talking about a lot of hard work. We're also talking about a sense of wonder. Wonder as in the jaw-dropping wonder of seeing the cosmos, but also wonder, I think this is part of my poetry quest, wonder as what lies behind this? What makes this happen? If I push an emotion so far, where will it turn? Where will it go? So there is this constant sense of questing and wonder which takes you on. And when you apply that to an earlier form, you're using your imagination, right? And and for me, imagination is not just the ability to invent things, but it is also very much the way you possess, transform things that are around you, whether of the past or of the present. And here too is one of the reasons why I go into earlier forms. Also, there is a political valency in the sense that you, you know, we have a, we come from plural faiths. We are a country of multiple voices, tongues, languages, oral traditions, uh, painting traditions, often which clash with one another. But we have lived with this. And when you take an earlier form, for me, it is also a validation of those very traditions that exist, of our plurality. It's hugely significant for me, therefore, to rework it.
I see. Okay. So, I have seen a plenty of, let's say, the use of myths and, such narratives, symbols, etc.
Mm, mm.
In what way are these valuable to you? I mean, what compels you to revisit and, do this kind of a reimagination, like how you did with Fafnir, how you have done with Andal, and in the
So,
subsequent works. Yeah.
yeah, I think it began, part of it began with my interest in miniature painting, which
Mhm.
really opened up worlds of beauty to me. The other was Tamil Sangam poetry, okay? Because especially their love poetry. And Tamar Sangam is pretty ancient, 2 BCE to about 4 CE.
Mhm.
And in their love poetry, there are 2 or 3 marvelous things, which first, all the lovers are anonymous. And that immediately kind of, splays the ground open. This idea of you don't put a face to it, you just are in the emotion. The other is they used metonym, not simile, not metaphor so much, but metonym. And the moment you use metonym, it's very exciting to read. It allows space for the reader. And this has been a constant, shall I say, um, it's something I love very much. It's very, very significant to me to have the reader become part of the work. I go halfway, you come halfway to me.
Oh, that's thunder and lightning, is it? It's
Well, let's see,
perfect
abhi
atmosphere for
sarega
writing. Yes, talking about Kalidas then, because that's where I think they should lead us. So please
Yes,
tell us about your engagement with Kalidasa.
yes. Kalidasa, again, beautiful language, marvelous. You can't fault him for his, I mean, he's justly called a great court poet, a great Sanskrit poet, the greatest of them all, etc. But, of course, this is a contemporary woman reading it. There is spirituality in his poems, no doubt. But when I was reading Ritu Samharam, the gathering of seasons, as he puts it, I was getting more and more irritated with his, idea of women always being available as objects of sexual love or desire. And it provoked a series of 6 poems from me, one for each season, where I speak about Kalidas. I quote from his poem, and then I give my response to it. So I'll read you Rain, since it's raining now. Rain, Kalidas's Varsha. In translation, the season's rainy fingers puts leaves and blossoms on the forest. Slow spreading low clouds sadden the hearts of lonely women. Very beautiful. But here's my rain. Once there was no horizon. Sky and earth mingled in a womb of rain as you entered me. Now I lie alone, my vision clear, my body rich with memories of passing showers. Choro. Go on. You have to. I mean, I think the idea of women who have been, who have wanted to sing in public, in the public domain over the years, over the centuries, and have been denied that. This concept is also very important for me. So I think that might be, it's just something I'm hitting on now. I think it might be one of the reasons why I keep going back to these earlier poems and reworking them from a woman's point of view. But Andal is another chapter altogether. But before that, may I just talk to you a little bit about this idea of the reciprocity, which I want from the reader. Yeah, because that has been hugely important. I do not want to ever lead the reader by the, I mean, I also write speculative fiction, and I try not to lead the reader through, a kind of driven, action-packed suspense at all, but what do you do if you take off the suspense? Then what can you explore? That to me is more exciting. So there are many ways in which you can work with reciprocity. But in this poem, this is a book called No News. Okay, 90 poets reflect on a unique BBC newscast. And this was, the idea behind this book was that on April 18, 1930, at 8:45, the BBC announced there was no news and they played piano music for the rest of the time. And this was given the commission to us. What do you do when there's piano music and silence? What is no news? And now I think there's a hell of a lot that is not considered news, but is news. So I'll just show you the way I've laid this out. Could you see it?
Yes, we can.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It is right aligned. Now, the moment I think it's right aligned, I did this because I think it might make the reader pause and think, now, why is it right aligned? And that would immediately get the reader in. There's something wrong, there's something different happening in this poem. So I work with the page too, I work with layout. It's almost like I'm working in a calligraphic mode at times, but this is one of the reasons. So I'll read this, No News, which is also pushes into another very important stream in my writing, increasingly so, of eco-poetry, drawn perhaps from the earlier poets, but now, of course, there's not just climate change, there's climate breakdown. So an extract from No News. There is no news that every dusk and dawn you or your ancestors saw is unique. Look at that plume of plum quivering on the horizon before graying. As the night duty nurse pulls on her uniform, her armpit stained already with foreknowledge of strain. As the owls awaken, sun eyes scanning for rats, and the city leopard slinks from the disused drain pipe, that's his lair. There's no news of terraced hillsides glistening 33,000 silvery reflections, each one shafted by blades of 33,000 rice seedlings, as if each moon echo is a Buddha, walking on water calm, except for that spurt of leaping carp, while below, ancient blood-soaked land yields fertilizer for feuds still singing in synapses lit with quantum victories, each one of us a warrior, lost even to ourselves, amidst new histories, discovered as a robo does his rounds and satellites track wars of every type, while the planet's thin skin flutters flags of flames till smoke billows oblations to the pyres of our unborn, while the aurora borealis pleats the sky in jewel shades, mined in the lava-fed underground, which rumbles. There is no news that grace pours, no news that night cleanses cities so that daybreak is fresh, no news that love rises to the stratosphere like a loaf in an oven. There is no news that Kairos is potential every moment, trembling in your palm. Thank you. So it's which I did want to get away, as it were, from the natural landscape into the cityscape, and to speak about what I increasingly call the everyday sacred, which I find is there around us in almost everything we do. And this is, I think, a part of the process of, as you grow into poetry over the decades, you just begin to, I think, listen harder, listen to the unsaid things that people don't say. But you can hear them if you follow them. You can, you see through their body language, through intonation, entire histories. And if you observe with attention, which I think we are supposed to do, then so many things, so many life forms begin to speak to you, and your world, I think, gets infinitely increased, expanded, and more beautiful. And that's important for me. Yeah.
Well, that's a very, very interesting thought, and I'm just going to have a small interlude. I have two questions that I need to ask you, and at the end of which I will be opening the session for questions. So the audience is welcome to ask you questions. Now, in the meanwhile, what I wanted to ask you was to do with the idea of the body. Hmm? What does the body mean to you? I mean, how do you envisage the body? What is the body in your imagination, in your concept? And also, uh, what is nature to you? I mean, you have mentioned that that entire spectrum of, let's say, how we are all linked, kind of a thing. But let's say a little more specificity with regard to particularly your eco poetry, which I think it's again long in the coming, because I've seen traces of it in work from an earlier time. I've seen it in Fafner's Heart, in Clone, in all of it, calling over to, obviously. So yeah, these two things. It's a bit of an interest to me.
The body. I think for this, I would first have to speak about Andal, because this 15-year-old girl who lived in the 9th century, now regarded as a goddess, she transformed for me the sense of the body. Because for her, the body is a site of the sacred, it's a site of great sexual pleasure as well. And in one go, she collapses and deepens the idea of the body as receptacle of, and the idea of the body as desire pushing through virtually the impossible to attain what she wants. There is, of course, a body of language that in poetry we're always meshing, pushing it through this mesh and trying to get the finest, most translucent, most correct, not correct, the most resonant words that we can use. There is the idea of writing with the body, which for me is important. You're not writing with your brain, you're not writing with you're writing with your breath. It is for me the movement of breath which comes into the emotion. So I am writing with my breath, my body, and when I write, my body is intensely alive. It is like, shall I say, I'm like a candle lit at both ends at that time and burning all over. And it is this body which allows us to experience the passage of time, isn't it? And that process is important to me. It's important to me that we know sadness, and through sadness we get to something like compassion or understanding. And this often happens with the loss of a body, the loss of an identity. So there's so much that is linked, and basically this soul you have, your body, which you will be also leaving one day. And when you have it, you work with it. So may I read one poem from Andal, which speaks of a very different kind of body. It speaks of the body of Narasimha, the the lion god, as it were, Vishnu in his avatar as this lion who is fearsome. And I loved it because here again is an idea of the body of this young woman who wants these fierce caresses on her. And she is prepared for anything to go through the transformation to be with him. There are three versions of this, of which I'll read the second and the third, which are my interpretations. Whirling clouds, you enlarge in anger and growl across the sky, rending it open with lightning. Spilling honey, you tear flowers, petals spatter like blood on earth. Go to the fierce lord who roars and mauls, tossing his mane as his paws ripped insides out. Tell him I'm bloodied. He must heal me with long caresses, still me in his thrall. Or maybe what Andal actually means is, engorged with anger, nails extending, he kills, plunging wrists in blood. Yet from these very hands I seek fondling, gather my swollen brightness in, as spilling nectar, my body's blood flower bursts. Yeah, right?
Yes, the way it comes around.
Thank you. Thank you. It's Andal. I mean, she is so intense. And when I was working with her, I felt that I think she's the most superb poet I've ever read, and I've been fortunate to translate over a decade. And you have this sense of enormous intelligence swarming all over the place. And she's telling you, here, make this connection, make that connection. Hey, there's something else. It was an amazing experience. That was your question about the body, right?
Yes, that was it. Next is about the nature. You know, how is it that this concern has filtered down, and the ways in which you have chosen to express it. Because I found that you have tried to bring in a certain sense of eco-consciousness through the very material, the material terms in which human beings have learned to read, negotiate, and translate. So, in particular, one of your poems, eco literature, the question paper. Yeah.
The question paper, yes. This is actually a part of my speculative fiction writing, and I find that more and more, I think that, you know, as you go deeper and deeper into darkness, which we are, there is more and more a need for light, to search for light. And also, you have to have, what you have, as Tuka said, we only have words. Words are the only jewels I possess. Words are the only treasures I can share. So with these words, what can you do? And with this, which I wrote as a literature paper, a paper in ecology, with questions for the reader to answer in fiction, non-fiction, translation, and poetry, each with a given set of marks. I wanted the reader to kind of face up to what that was, but I'll read you the poetry here. You get 15 marks if you can answer this question out of a 100-mark paper. Poetry. What significance does this political poem of the 21st century have today? It's a poem I wrote called Invocation, Spirit of Water, 15 marks. Make me dew that touches all without distinction. Like snowflakes, let my perfect structures yield to the melt of being. As an underground river flowing through drought, make me draw from secret sources, sweet and salt, estuarine, let differences mingle in my blood. And tidal courage I call upon you to return after the ebb. Spirit of water, give me hope. Print on me oceans covered with sky, and when fiery fissures open, remind me of life. Fill my marrow with glacial ice that cuts rock to nourish spring. Add one more wish to this. Make me a mountain lake, calm and deep, that reflects light. Now, your 15 marks to answer that question. Are there any other questions coming up?
Yeah, there's one actually. I'm going to take that privilege. I would like to know what next.
What
What are you
next?
working on?
Well, actually, I'm delighted to announce that I have a book coming out next month with context that's Amazon Westland. It's called Sing of Life, Revisioning Tagore's Gitanjali. And this again, you know, when I go into projects, I don't plan ahead. I just plunge in without thought of publishing, who's going to take it, nothing of the sort. And I was with my husband in Beed, in this mountain village in a town in the Himalayas, having nice South Indian coffee right up there in the mountains. And on the bookshelf was the Gitanjali, which we picked up to riffle through, you know. And when I started reading it, it was as if his parts of his words lifted off and came in, and I could make new poems from his poems. So this is I would think, a radical revisioning of the Gitanjali, which I think Tagore would approve of, because I think he always said, you who will be there 100 years later, what will you do? Will my words speak to you? Will you rewrite it? Yes, I have. But I worked only with his words, only Tagore's words in Sing of Life.
And what did you find about the man, about his poetry when you did that? I mean, you know, in terms of insight.
I had always stayed away, frankly, from Tagore. He seemed to be too much of, shall we say, Gurudev was too much from Bengal. And there was so much research on him, so much work, that it was daunting to explore. But as I read the Gitanjali, I mean, there he is. He is a modernist Bhakti poet, the closest we can get. The last Bhakti poet as I know of today. And Bhakti, as you might know, is a very strong impulse or a pull that I work towards. Because it's like a river that burns through, you know, of lava. It burns the barriers, it burns the boundaries, it burns yourself, but it opens out things. And here was this man who was speaking of with deep honesty about pain, loss, suffering. He'd lost his wife, he'd lost his children. He was writing Gitanjali at a time of great spiritual questing. And the way he works slowly through this, through the various moods, despair, wonder, joy, fearlessness, that drew me a lot to him. The sheer beauty, actually, he transports you, I must say. Gurudev does. So I found.
Okay, so now if anybody would like to ask Priya Sarukkai Chabria anything, please do. Otherwise, I'm going to take up your time because I still have things to ask. Yes, Prashant would like to.
Hi, Prashant.
Hi, Priya. Really enjoyed listening to this conversation. I just had this question which connects to two ideas that you spoke about. One, the idea of body, and the other, the idea of engaging with the audience. And you spoke about this capacity in bhakti poetry to engage the body as a site of creation. And I was thinking that in bhakti poetry, the other thing which happens a lot is that body is also the site of receiving through song, and that
Yes.
enters the body so immediately in some sense. So now that we are working today with page and words, and there's a great tendency in modern poetry to engage the mind first and then the body, how as a poet do you then think about engaging the audience's or the reader's body into the act of reading in some way?
First of all, I don't quite believe in this mind-body
Yeah.
divide, okay? Because your emotions are also thoughts. They're intelligent. It's not some other outward thing which is coming to you. And so you're engaging totally all the time with both. And as you said in bhakti, it is a way of receiving and a way of giving. But don't you find that it is in poetry? I mean, it's never a one way, is it? Anything in life is never one way. And art, when you are transformed, I think you also, this is where I say the reciprocity of the reader or the listener. You also transform whatever the poem is with your understanding, it becomes your own. So there is always this mesh. There is always, and what happens in this mesh, I mean, just when you read something that you like very much, I suggest just as an experiment, notice your breath, notice how it moves, and you'll see the difference when you're reading something which is powerfully angry and motivating. See how it works. While the ideas are pouring forth in that book, and then read something else, which is, say, grief, the long lines of grief. And you will see how that also moves. So it's intrinsic. And that I think is how you absorb, how you get the reader in. But most importantly, there is the intent, right? I think the intent is there to welcome him, to share space with the reader does come in with mind, body, spirit, even a little cough comes in and takes it on. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Anybody else? Thank you, Prashant. It was a beautiful question.
Mm.
Anybody else? In which case, Priya, I would like to. Yes. Ashwin would like to, please. Ashwin, unmute yourself, please.
Hello, Priya. Very happy to be listening to you speak about the way you approach poetry and all the details. So the anecdote about Gitanjali caught my fancy, and I wanted to ask you something specifically related to your process, and how much of balance is there between intent and accident. Uh, this is something that excites me in terms of poetic process. So how much of it is intent and how much of it is accident, and if you could share any anecdotes or any details into that, into your process, that would be very exciting.
Right. How you begin, I think, is always accident in a sense, because it's not planned. It's like you don't try to become a writer. You need to write in order to live. You write to live. You write to express yourself. So it is that. But again, if we are speaking of Gitanjali and therefore a seas of grace, you know, in that field, they say nothing is quite coincident. You know, there is a lot of coincidence. You hit what you are searching for. So, but certainly, I think it would be, for me, something or the other that catches your eye, which has multiple resonances, you know. So it just sparks off, right? And you see 5 or 6 things, or it might be a phrase that turns up in your mind when you're sleeping. I'm sure this has happened to you. A phrase that is turning from the darkness of your body, one little golden phrase which turns in your mind, and you write it out at dawn and the poem follows. So that the intent is what you carry in you all the time. All the time. Hello, are you there?
He is. The mic is muted, that's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's just that my internet connection was shaky. Yeah, so the intent is, I think, how you have lived your life. It is not, your poetry is not separate or different from the way you live, right? You don't stop being a poet at some time. You're a poet all the time. You're a speculative fiction writer all the time. So what drives you? What drives you? And at times like this, when there is a pandemic, and have you heard the sirens screaming at the background?
Yeah.
When there is so much mortality around, what has it done to us? I think I mean, without being glib, I think there is something about this which is a little like writing, because on the one hand, you know, you want to be in your bubble, you're very enclosed. On the other hand, the sheer suffering makes you open out to other people, and the sense of breaking out of fear. Now, this is the way we are being shaped by this. I think some of us are being shaped by this pandemic. And obviously, this is going to be plow into my intent. Without my intent is not conscious. Let me make that decision clear. It is almost, it is a passage you are moving towards. I think I'm an intuitive writer, therefore. So, you know, it is accident, intent, which is always with you, and then the burnishing. Lagao polish, lagao polish, lagao polish, you know, time and time and time again, till you know you've got it right for some time. And over time, it takes time. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Thank you. And I think you ended on a very, very poignant note about time. And we have been thinking about time more than anything else right now. And we have been like we are writers even when we do not write, but we are essentially writers because we write. And all those questions are left with me as you conclude your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin.
Thank you.
It's taken our conversation to another dimension, has it not? Anybody else? Would you like to raise a question? Meanwhile, Priya, you've translated from Tamil and, quite from the Sangam period and so on. What I wanted to ask you was, when you translate into a language like English, what are the processes that you go through? I mean, does the language, do you have to meld it, or do you have to mold it, coax it, break it? What do you, how does that happen? What negotiation goes on?
You know, for me, because what I've been translating is so enriching, it's such a gift. I don't think of breaking anything. I think of it more as organic growths. Like, for example, when I was translating Andal, she writes in classical Tamil, and which is a very complex, dense language. It's almost like the Gopuram structures, you know, the clustered. And the assonance and the alliteration that she uses, you can never reproduce. But what you can do when you translate into English is to is to work with density on one level, a tumbling, ferocious density. But then Sangam Poetics also does something which is wonderful. It gives you various levels of meaning. So the first level is all that, the literal is what you get. Then there is a hidden level, which you prize out. Again, the reader, my wonderful unknown friend, comes here and has to work it out. I give one idea, you work out the other. And then there is an inset, a secret hidden meaning, which again, I might give one meaning, but the other person works it out. See, with the idea of translation also, what is important is in our cultures, subcontinental cultures, we don't have one idea of translation. We don't have to be faithful. You know, we're not torn between being faithful to the word or faithful to the spirit. We're not writing the glorious St. James Bible, you know. We have been living with multiple translations, multiple versions of the same stories for decades and contesting stories. So when you're translating, you have a great sense of freedom. Being a translator, working in the Indian idiom. That I think helps get over some of these hoary walnut or tamarind questions, sour tamarind questions about, are you being faithful, or are you, how do you make it? How did I make it? I mean, what is this process of translation? You read, and then, you know, she seeps into your consciousness, and you take a long time to understand it, to, you know, there are levels and levels of understanding her, understanding the person you're translating. And then when you put it out, it is, of course, your voice and hers. There's nothing as an invisible translator. We know that very well. It's your voice. But how deeply do you permit her to come into your consciousness? And when you're working with someone who is long past, like Andal or Manika Vachkar, I work with ancient Tamil Bhakti poets, how do you check? That's you know, that becomes important. So what I do is I try to visit their places. Now, the moment you go to Andal country, which is deep South India between Kerala and Tamil Nadu, the hills, Tenai district, Meghamalai sanctuary, you hear something else. You hear silence there. I mean, you understand so much of Andal, talking to elephants and birds, when you see such a beautiful image. You know, this is where she lived. And that helps you understand the person, gets you deeply involved. Now, I am at the moment also translating Manika Vachkar, who's a 9th century Shaiva poet. And I can say that it's going to take me another 5 years at least to break through the levels, because you have to be able to dissolve yourself before you can reconstruct his voice. I think that is my approach to translation.
Actually, in fact, I think something of what you said was a question that was also posed by Anju Makhija ji, you know, who was asking you, we live in a time when writers reinvent, respond, react freely to past work. Do you feel a sense of doubt or do you confidently proceed?
Do you feel a sense of doubt or do you?
Confidently proceed.
Well, Anju, I mean, you've been translating Sufi poetry, haven't you? And therefore you would be facing some of the, not issues, but the quests that I'm facing. That do you confidently proceed at all time? When you feel there's a breakthrough, it's not every day, then of course you're glorious. But then how do you're often told by the meaning of certain words, have you got all the, the levels of meanings of these words? And with Bhakti poetry, Sufi poetry that you have been translating, it's always that you can never have a definitive translation. Because the Bhakti poet, if it's Andal, that 15-year-old, she's running out there on the horizon, skimming the horizon, and you are constantly running after her, trying to understand the fullness of her words, as you would if it was, say, Bulle Shah you're doing. We cannot understand the fullness of his ecstasy, the depth of his despair, or all that it entails. I mean, it's like going into the core of the earth or something like that. You just try to get all you can, and it's not definite. And that there must be more and more newer translations coming out ever so often. That's also important. Yeah, Anju, does that answer your question?
Well, it was on Facebook, so I guess she's watching it from there. She was here for a brief while, but I think
she's gone to Facebook.
She was here for a brief while. So anybody else, would you like to? Meanwhile, I'll just read some of the comments we have. Well, apparently it's been a great learning experience for Mandakini Pachori, who says she's got a lot to think over and she's been taking notes. So, there's Mandakini for you.
Hello, lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
Yeah. So you're writing, translating, or?
I write in English, but I'm living in Austria.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not that well known, so my situation is that I'm always filtering my language through another language because I speak German and I hear German around me, and I've been here for 30 years. So yes, I'm in constant translation, and sometimes I'm between languages. Thank you very much.
Yes. So are you living in Vienna?
Yes.
Oh, that's one of my favorite cities.
Well, you're always welcome.
Thank you so much. Yes, it is difficult to live in one and to hear one language all the time and work in another. I mean, I am basically from what is now called Tamil Nadu, right? And I'm living in an area where we hear Hindi, we hear Marathi. I'm in Pune, near Bombay. So I'm hearing all these other languages and not Tamil. And you don't even get a good Tamil TV channel here. So when I want to hear the sound of Tamil, I am more than a bit lost. Then I go to YouTube and try to, play something familiar. But there is this, and there is the sense of the colloquial. What I find happening is that, when I'm in a queue or going to Chennai, catching a flight before the pandemic, people would be talking Tamil. And I would eavesdrop. I would just eavesdrop to get the sense of the familiar,
Yes.
So what do? You have to do this. But I'd love to read your work too. I mean, it's this idea of being well known and being a poet or being a writer. I think that is a terrible illness that is within us. And it hurts when you're not known. I took a lot of decisions which, absolutely made me feel. Have you ever heard Leonard Cohen?
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah. Then you know when he says, "In this from this broken hill, if it be thy will, let me sing." All that I used to cling on to, saying, "Should I write? Should I stop?" But how can you stop writing? And I
That's
think,
right.
so I think just persisting, just believing in the
Well,
words.
persisting. I sit on my eggs. I keep them. I just don't send them out. That's my way. I just.
Well, that's
So,
a different.
That's a cowardly way to do things. But I'll be reading in the Samyukta,
Lovely.
festival. Yeah, so I'm being drawn out by my compatriots in India, and that is very beautiful. But another thing, what you said about the colloquialism, I found that like my Hindi has become quite antiquated. I learned it in India, back then. And now, like I find my Hindi, I'm often shocked at the way people speak Hindi because, I think like that's not done, right? The registers have changed. And that is also very interesting. Or, so one is kind of always sort of tuning into other wavelengths and like some old shortwave radio, and you have no idea if you're like really at your station, or if you even have a station, right? So yeah, but so thank you, it's been so very inspiring, and I will get your books and
Please do.
yeah.
But may I say something about Tamar then? Tamar, since I don't hear it very much, but I love the way, in a sense, our languages are constantly changing, right? What Andal, for instance, spoke of as classical Tamar is what we'd say a mix of Tamar and Malayalam. She'd use the word noka, which in Malayalam means sea, while in Tamar we say pare. So there are all these differences. And now in Tamar, how do you say carrot? How do you say bread? Let me tell you, carrot, bread. You just round it off and you get it. And, it's this melt of languages. And at the same time, when we're speaking, we're quite happy saying acha or whatever it is. We're drawing from other languages as well. So there is this marvelous mix, this garland, shall we say, of languages that come in and idyllics that mix when we speak.
Absolutely, because and sometimes it's just taken as accepted usage. Like in Malayalam, nobody ever says "vivaha bhojanam" anymore. I think it's a mouthful anyway. Everybody across the, let's say, make it anyway, just say, "Oh, our divorce side." It's not divorce, but it's divorce. But still, they will say it that way, and they'll say dress edukkan pogunnu. So all of this has just percolated, and it is all considered, as part of Malayalam. So we don't see those differences, and this is something that we were going to take up in our translation panel as well.
Lovely. I'd love to attend to that. Yes, I'd love to be there. That would be, as they say in Tamil, super.
Exactly. With that particular inflection, the word is ours then.
Yes, absolutely. You make it yours. And that's the way languages grow, right? It's not just Shakespeare who invented so many words to make his meanings clear. I think we're always constantly doing that. And that is quite wonderful.
Because I think you have used the word Talaividhi in one of your poems. I absolutely liked it, Talaividhi, lines of fate. Yes. It gets a surprise. There I was reading everything in English, it goes. Then it says, concealed in contentment's sediment, below laughter's lapping shadows. You can't blame Talaividhi, fate's line, the birth of galaxy Z2456. And I was like, yeah, wait a minute. Talaividhi? And it's that absolute flow in which it just goes, without a pause or a break, where the reader also goes along with it, then comes back. I think those are those, little Easter eggs, little spaces that you leave for the reader to react within your poetry. And that I find admirable. There's I think even in your line breaks, there are those spaces where you are saying, maybe you want to think it again, or do you think, kind of a thing, and then it's automatically, it goes like that. Absolutely lovely.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful reading. That was, and how you picked that word, talaividi, which I have used, you know. But really, I'm very glad you gave me this, not feedback, but this response. Feedback seems somehow very commercial, like you're filling up a form, but a response which is very meaningful to me. Thank you so much, Samya.
Absolutely. We have actually another comment from Mrinalini Harchandroy, who says one of the few translators, if not the only one, who does not just one but three facets of translation for each of Andal's verses into English. And she calls you just brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you. That's because the form allows it, you know. You are allowed to go into it. And actually, this was talking about, Anju might be interested in this, and all of you who are getting into translation or living with two languages. What I did this book with the poet Ravi Shankar, who's US based, and he works very quickly on poems. Mine is all dampak, slow. I sleep over it, then I come back to it. And after the first visit, when he was staying with me in my house for a week, and we were discussing Andal, by the time he kind of got off in New York, back home, he had translated the first of her works, Tirupavai, 30 verses, like that, and sent it to me, and I was amazed. But then when I read it, I thought, hey, come on. My Andal doesn't use that language. My Andal won't use that tone. What do we do? And it made absolute sense to have two translators, therefore, who offer two versions of the same poem, because you don't have to collaborate. Collaborating doesn't mean forcing, you know, your words into one kind of construct. I wonder if that is ever true, that both two people who are working on a book can have the same construct. So give the space. So you have Ravi's interpretation, which is very nice. A man, a 6'2" man, giving you, embodying this, the voice of this tiny little 13-year-old, and then me as a woman. And if we have time, just one instance about translation. I found what was happening was that Ravi, being so Andal, much better. He saw her form. Okay, he would he used words like flower, like breasts like upturned flowers for Andal, which I thought was very beautiful, base as she's a 15, 16-year-old. I wouldn't have thought of it. I would go into the classical, round hills of my breast, because that's what she says. But hey, man, I know when she menstruates. That's what I found, being a woman. So, you know, these kind of constructions, and of course, being a woman too, I think I found my Andal was much more angry. It happens. Women feel freer expressing the anger of other women.
There's a question by Shalini Pattabhiraman on Facebook.
Yes.
She asks, how do you negotiate past and present and the evolution of words, meaning, interpretation in language?
How do you negotiate the past and present?
Yes, and the evolution of words / meaning / interpretation in language.
Well, that is one long, sorry. It's just that we have a lot of something that completely stops all thought. I'm having a host of insects landing up on my laptop, but we shall try to continue minus that. Language, meaning. So all these are, all these different, sorry, I'm a bit distracted. All these various levels of meaning of living, how do I interpret it in language? First of all, where does language spring from? Oh, please. Where does language spring from? I'm asking, can we have a conversation with Shani? Is that possible?
No, she's on Facebook. She should have come into the meeting then possibly.
Okay. Sorry, I'm going to be doing this all the time. Actually, I won't be quite able to answer that in any satisfying way right now, because though I am a scholar, I do a lot of research into everything before I work on a poem. I normally know the background inside out if it's a historical or set in the past. But how do I work through language and meaning? And meaning always is going to shift, right? It shifts from day to day, from time to time. No meaning is fixed. And by the way, just to detract, but one of the things I have to say is, this is the problem I have with books which have this wonderful even tone. I love it when I read a great narrative, smoothly flowing, the same tone from beginning to end, lyrical and with these gorgeous words. I'm completely involved and absorbed in it. But talking about the movement of language through time, two things are happening. Your language is moving through time in two ways. One, through your body as you write. So there's a shift. Two, through the character, at least two ways, through the character or what you're writing, the poem that you're writing. It's moving and shifting and turning. So the person, especially if it's a novel or long fiction, the person you start off with, the narrator, the character, whatever, and the person you end up with, the narrator, cannot be the same, cannot use language the same way. It has to change. Otherwise, it's not true for me. So I admire that kind of writing. I mean, I did this book clone, which might answer your questions. It's set in the 24th century, and it's about a woman. I think it does, thank you. I think it does answer Shelley's question, because it speaks about how you use language through time. This is a time in the character's life from when she's a clone, robotic, has not much emotional intelligence, to at the end when she has language at her command. She has emotions at her command. She has history at her command. And so how did I work that? I worked that by working on the micro level. If I use the word red in the beginning, or rather my character clone, the clone used the word red in the beginning to describe a certain object. Towards in the middle of the book, she might use scarlet, thereby making the choice more subtle, showing her evolved aesthetic, emotional, spiritual, etc. And at the end of the book, it might be ruby, which is luminous. And this is one of the ways I can think of working with a meaning, language through time, which I have done. Okay, Shalini.
That's terrific.
Right.
So I think I have a feeling we would be here all night if your insects allowed it. Because it's this wonderful energy that we have. But I think if there are no other questions or queries, we can wrap it up.
I think I'd like to end by telling you the story of fireflies, which is a tale I read in childhood in my school books. And it said something about fireflies, which I never forgot. And it said that, you know, fireflies were once two nymphs who were a male and a female musician and musicians who lived in the clouds, and they were not supposed to love, so forbidden love. So, but they were caught. And because they were caught, and they were pushed down to the earth. And when they fell from the clouds into the earth, because of their love, their bodies glowed and became 1,000 pieces of glowing light, which were fireflies. But right now we don't have fireflies around us. Right now we have what in Tamil is called Ishal, which is the, not the hornet. It is, it too lives for a day. What is this insect?
Is that what we call in Malayalam as eel?
I think so. After the rains, it comes, it has one, it is...
not cicadas, is it?
My God, I've forgotten the English word for it. See how deeply it has sunk only into my childhood. And why here it is all around me. They're in their dozens. And they'll all be dead by tomorrow. So maybe it's a time to give prayer to for their souls and happy rebirths or whatever, and call it a day, and wish all of you happy reading, happy writing, and a good year. Thank you very much.
Priya, thank you very much, because you know, when you spoke, we could find that generosity of your thoughts that is reflected in your lines. You know, seriously, I mean, that was beautiful, and the amount of time, you know, that is expressed in your words, we find in these lines as well. You know, that interminable stretch of canvas that we call time. So for taking us across all of that, for talking to us without, you know, really making it a master class about art and its craft, about craft and its art, you know, especially the transition of color through that, through just that, you know, and for not reading for the reader, for letting us have a sense of sentience, which is beautiful, you know, seriously. And when you were talking about the Shara and the Akshara, I was also thinking that there's this connect between the mortal and the immortal, which one ends up making, you know. So
Yes.
all I have to say about this particular session is that thank you for being so, thank you for making, or let's say giving us your work that is so Asim and Azim, limitless and magnificent.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I enjoyed myself very much today. Thank you. Really, it's been very warm and welcoming, this space.
Also, for showing us that intuitive writing can go a long way.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much,
See you then.
everybody.
Thank
And
you.
I would like to give a special shout out to Ashwin and Soni Somarajan, who have been faithfully ferrying all the questions from Facebook. So thank you very much, both of you. And everybody who's here with us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.